everyone. Welcome to this engaging discussant interview right here at the APVA 2023 Awards. It's my pleasure again to bring another interesting conversation to your hearing and viewing. Well, I'm T-Code. Of course, I've got to say that over and over and over again, because if you've been following, it's been series of winners being announced, as well as discussant sessions where we talk to professionals in the podcasting, voiceover, and spoken word artistry industry right here in Africa. But this time around, we decided to go a bit, further into how the audio landscape is in Africa. And, we're talking to someone who is not just an expert in audio production, but also a head, or would I say a leader in the radio business, because as you would rightly agree with me, radio is more like the grandfather of many of these platforms that we use today: podcasting, voiceovers, find expression on radio, and spoken words still has some level of relationship. So let's talk about radio. Let's talk about audio broadcasting in Africa, and therefore we'll be looking at the future of audio broadcasting in Africa, insights from Kagiso Media, which also includes East Coast Radio and Jacaranda FM. So my South African brothers and sisters, we're coming to you right now. Anyways, to be my guest on this session is a former journalist and now a business leader. He leads the radio business within Kagiso Media. And KM Radio, that's the short form to, instead of saying Kagiso Media. And now KM Radio is one of South Africa's premier audio and broadcasting business, and it includes two of the country's most successful regional radios or radio stations, namely Jacaranda FM and East Coast Radio. So if you're wondering who is the man behind all of this, it's no other person than Nick Grubb. Hello, Nick.
Hey there, great to be here.
Great to have you here too. It's a pleasure to talk to a radio head, and I'm sure that with your many years of experience in the audio broadcast industry, you can give us some insight to how radio and the audio broadcast industry is taking shape in Africa.
Sure. Well, as you rightly put it, radio has really was the original social media, wasn't it? It's got a long and proud tradition of aggregating people around content and keeping people informed and entertained in urban centers and rural areas. And as such, it's been a medium that's been incredibly resilient, not just globally, but specifically in Africa. But I'd also want to say that I can't speak for Africa. Africa is not a country, but we obviously, all of us have individual opportunities and challenges that are specific to our territories. But then again, there are those sort of commonalities that are affecting audio and the audio business that we see on the continent, but then also on a global level. And for us, really, the future is really bright for those people that are working in the audio space. We've seen all around the world that despite many new formats and digital technologies that we think are going to usurp people's listening to audio, all it does is create more and more resilience. There's lots of change in the way people are listening to audio and the devices they use to access audio, but we're seeing that radio is still strong, and with the rise of podcasting and other audio-based forms of entertainment, we think that the future is bright.
Oh, great. Of course, South Africa for a long time over the decades has been a very influential part of the media in Africa. For instance, here in Nigeria, I know that a lot of times while growing up, I heard a lot of adverts that or voiceovers that were produced by, South African voiceover artists, and talk about the influx of the media, say DSTV and stuff like that. So I believe that, of course, and then talking to you, someone who is a leader of two of the most successful radio stations in South Africa, there's a lot that the continent has to learn. So let's start with the success of KM Media in managing and also the success of East Coast Radio and Jacaranda FM. How has the team, or how has the company or the establishments been able to survive over the years and rise to that level of being key players or key stakeholders in the radio and audio broadcasting business in Africa, or particularly in South Africa?
Sure. Well, from our point of view, radio is about real human connection. And I think that those brands and those stations that recognize that and double down on being local, on being relevant to the environment around them, on making sure that they don't just play syndicated, homogenized content, but really reflect, and not just in the content, but in the news and information, in the music that you play needs to be local, and even the advertisements. And I think that if you look at some of the markets where radio is starting to not look as strong, the US being one of those, it seems to have been really a consequence, not just of digital technology competing with that, but actually more so a case of them losing touch with the fact that radio is a local human experience. And what happened in the early 2000s was that in the US, there was a lot of consolidation of the radio market. They were buying up wholesale categories of radio stations and in various territories around the country, and then they were just syndicating content, through to those networks. And I think that it's the countries that have maintained their direct connection with their local advertisers, their local listeners, their local stakeholders that have really shown resilience. And that's certainly been one of the things that we believe in. I mean, fundamental to our stations is a lot of corporate social investment, a lot of matching the needs of a particular community with those that are able to contribute to those needs, and being the focal point, to coordinate an opportunity with a donor, and that, and then you build on top of that really credible news, and then sprinkle it with a good healthy dose of entertainment. And I think you've got a really sustainable format, whatever other technologies may rise up to compete with that. You can't break that human bond that you've been able to establish over time with your listener.
Wow, that's a big lesson for me to learn as a podcaster and a voiceover artist, and as someone who has worked in radio before now. The fact that localizing the content is very, very important, and it also helps in building a successful audio broadcasting corporation or company. Now, you also mentioned how there is the competing factors, and you're talking about technology and new media. So the question I'll be asking now is, how has KM Media been able to leverage on these new technologies and the competing ones, such that it's not swallowed in the competition? Because of course, as time goes, people are getting distracted and they're choosing different platforms that exist, and then we see the concentration on radio as a main platform has been divided across different medium. So how has KM Media been able to stay on top of that trend?
I think the first thing is by being very experimental. We embraced digital platforms and publishing platforms and streaming platforms very early. And we've certainly made many mistakes in trying to take our brands into these new platforms. But we've also learned a lot of significant lessons. And again, I think it comes back to, what does your brand represent? And if your brand represents real human connection, great, credible information, trustworthy relationships, and good entertainment, then it's a question of just finding the unique benefits of each platform and bringing that brand to life on each of those platforms in a natural way. I think, as a result of that, we've been able to maintain the two highest visited radio station websites in South Africa for the last 12 years. We've had the position 1 and 2 in the radio station category of web publishing, just as an example. So I think by doing that and by making it a natural, organic extension of your brand ecosystem, then it's really the way to go about it. I think that where we see people perhaps not being so successful is where they treat it as a completely separate platform, and it doesn't speak to the essence or the brand value of what you represent as a radio station to every listener. So it's and then I think on top of that, if you've got the right product, you need to see technology as just a new way to deliver that product to the eyes and ears of prospective new audiences. So, I think you really need to have an open mind and embrace those platforms as willingly as possible.
Great lesson learned, which is embracing or having an open mind to experiment with these platforms and seeing them as an avenue to export your product. Now, let's talk specifically about one of the contenders. Well, I stand to be corrected if it's actually a contender with radio, or if it's more, say, like going to complement radio. It's the grand debate of podcasting versus radio, because with the recent developments in the podcast industry, a lot of people, we have great numbers of podcasters. As I was speaking with Tony Doe, and he mentioned that according to statistics, there are over 200,000 podcasts in Africa. And that's quite a staggering amount. And then, and to a large extent, many of these podcasts are also localized. So then you see how powerful, and then it's an on-demand service. So I want to ask the question, first of all, which is, do you see podcasting, defeating radio? Or is radio going to evolve into podcasting? I really love to hear your answer to this.
I think the two are beautifully mutually beneficial to each other. I think that, for many years we've wondered, is linear media in a radio changes again in the way that people relate to radio stations or pick up live streams, but I think the immediacy and the relevance of a linear stream of content, you've seen it in a live sports game, for example, on television. Those will always be relevant. Linear television in that form might die at some point, but live sports games will always endure in those platforms. And similarly in radio, if you can kind of see it as a long-running live sports game, it's really if your brand is good and it reflects the life that's going on around you, then it will always fulfill a space in people's listening repertoire. Podcasting fulfills a different state, and that different need state is that I want to delve deeper into a particular niche and about which I'm passionate, or I really want to explore a topic that is that's fascinating to me. And so the platform of a podcast can do that in ways that are very different to what a radio station could achieve in it with a linear broadcast signal. So I think we see certainly the growth of podcasting as something that is more likely to compete with what people's choice of their own music, or what used to be their CD players in their cars. It'll replace that rather than the amount of time that they're necessarily spending listening to a linear radio broadcast.
Great. And having said all of this, I would believe that you've been able to successfully integrate podcasting into your broadcast system, or rather using podcasts to sell your product, as you said earlier. I want you to tell us a bit about the challenges you encountered when integrating these two medium, and how you overcame those challenges before we wrap up this conversation.
I think the first is that, like I said earlier about the other digital platforms, is that you've got to understand that the tone and the relationships that you develop must be in keeping with your brand, but it is a very different medium. So I think that we see that there are two types of podcasts that we currently produce in our environment at the moment. The one is time-stamped radio, if you like. So it's the things that we do on radio just repackaged for an on-demand space, and obviously that's more a question of just applying some production to what's already been on air. But what we're more excited about going forward is bespoke podcasting, content. So either spin-offs of content that happen on air, or spin-offs around the personalities of the people that we have on air, or licensing completely independent people into the environment and using radio to promote it. Because I think that what podcasting has got is real depth of content, and it can appeal to people who are passionate about that topic or that personality or whoever's hosting it. But what podcasting doesn't have is the loud hailer to draw attention to it. So you've got to spend just as much time, if you're a podcaster, producing great content, but also making sure that that great content is known, and that you're marketing it, and that you're getting it out to the, to the ears of the people that you want to reach. Radio can do that effortlessly. So I think that if you treat podcast as a specific medium, and you apply all of the production values that you would into that medium that make it a great piece of content, where you use radio in a complementary way, is to make sure that radio listeners are aware and that they can find it, and that you make it easy to find that content through the channels that the radio station offers.
All right. It's great learning from you again, like I said from the beginning, and I've seen the possibility of both coexisting. I've always seen that personally, but then with the development of podcasting, it's always a threat. You're just sort of like, are you sure radio is still going to survive? And I haven't played in both spaces, I can tell. So as an experienced professional for many years, holding it down in South Africa, over 12 years, or 12 years that you've been, or your firm has been number one on radio in South Africa. The question now is, what do you see the future of radio? And you can also answer in context of Africa, vis-a-vis the development of podcasting and perhaps the collaboration of both industry. Are we going to see more radio stations embracing it? Are we going to see a decline in the response to radio by the listeners, or it's just going to be a healthy competition between both, or just a coexistence? What do you see as the future of podcast and radio?
I see the two industries as very intertwined, and what radio's challenges on a terrestrial broadcasting platform is that whilst people will still listen to the radio and find space in their day to listen to the radio, and I really believe this to be true, we're seeing, for example, some younger generation people aren't listening to the radio as much as they used to. But when they get older and start work and kind of move to, start to live on their own, you find that they do turn to radio in the future. So I really do believe that people will still find space in their day for radio, perhaps not as much as they used to. So time spent with the radio might decline a little bit over time, and they'll be listening to different devices. They'll be listening perhaps more through a streaming platform than on a terrestrial TV broadcast, or in those territories in Africa where there's healthy DAB broadcast, they'll be listening on that format, perhaps less than FM. But where radio's challenges is around revenue, because all of these other platforms divide the advertising pie into ever smaller pieces. So as much as we may still reach the same level of consumers, we may not be able to create as much advertising revenue opportunities out of those experiences going forward, because a marketer today has to divide their budgets across all these other platforms. So at the moment, while radio has got a healthy proportion of ad spend, podcasting is a new industry that's growing exponentially in listenership, but doesn't quite have the advertising support. I think at some point, radio it's a natural extension for a radio operator to turn their hand to podcasting, because they've got the facilities, they're naturally good storytellers, and they've got access to communities of other people who are great content producers. So I think it makes sense for radio stations to promote, nurture, and encourage the podcast industry as much as they can. And then over time, you'll find that as listenership grows into a kind of critical mass for podcasting, the revenue opportunities there will also start to develop. Perhaps as the revenue opportunities in terrestrial radio start to decline a little. So it's a way to offset those declines and to maintain your sustainability as a broadcaster going forward. And I think, it's not exclusive to radio operators. I think people who set up their own podcast studios and, plug away at their own content will have just as good a chance. But I think that radio, as I said, the radio industry can help nurture those podcasters by drawing attention to the content that they have, and driving listeners towards more and more audio formats.
Great. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Nick. And I want to say a very big thank you for sharing those insights with us. I learned a lot. I learned the need for radio to localize their content, as it's going to help them succeed. I also learned the fact that radio and podcasts complement each other a lot, and radio stations should be very open to leveraging on new technologies, mediums, media, and of course, podcasts. So it's been a pleasure talking to you. And thank you for honoring our interview.
It's an absolute pleasure, and all the best with the awards, and congratulations to the winners.
Thank you. All right, people, let's get back to the award. You just heard it from Nick Grubb, and Nick Grubb, of course, is a lead of Kagiso Media. He taught me the pronunciation earlier. I'm coming to South Africa soon, and we're just going to talk about everything. So I need to learn the language. Anyways, let's get back to the rest of the awards. It's T Code, and I'll see you soon.